Absolute Superman finally snaps, and here's the reason why. You got Brainiac drilling into this guy's head, just tearing away into this dude's skull. So, what this does here, picking up after the last video that we did, where basically he'd been captured by Ra's al Ghul, and then was basically being subjected to torture in order to turn him into a villain, that you pick up on Krypton, right? And what do we get here? For the crime of ambition, we find the L's guilty. For the crime of third-degree descent, we find the L's guilty. For the crime of illegal use of science, we find the L's guilty. Now, one of the things to remember here, right, is much like the main DC universe, that the parents of Superman were trying to warn the planet that it was going to come to an end. But unlike the main DC universe, where the biggest issue is the fact that it's just too late to save the world, in the Absolute Universe, on that version of Krypton, the Kryptonian government is incredibly corrupt. So they're completely aware of the fact that the world is ending, and they've been lying to everybody about it, while secretly building escape vessels for themselves and leaving the citizens of Krypton to the planet's destruction. And so with Superman here, watching his parents' trial, his response, right, stop, you're killing them. And that's where the government says, Jor-El and Lara-El have been found guilty by a simulated jury of their peers, and they are hereby sentenced to hang from the skies above Kandor for 100 years. And then they address Superman directly, right? As for your crimes, Kal-El of the Redlands, for the misdemeanor offense of being an orphan, the Science League hereby sentences you to 20 years confinement in the Phantom Zone orphanage. And then he immediately lashes out, right? And he tries to say, like, Krypton is going to die. You guys need to do something. And that's where they're just like, blasphemy, another 5 years, right? So it's very totalitarian. But what happens? Superman snaps and he kills everybody. He kills the government officials. He kills the cops that are trying to arrest him. Everyone gets eradicated. And that's where you get this voice out of nowhere that says, tell me you're making progress. Beautiful, blood-drenched progress. And that's when you switch over to what's really going on out in Greenland, which is that this is all a simulation. None of this is actually happening. We've seen how Superman's story unfolds in the reality of him showing up on Earth in the Absolute Universe. And that's where Brainiac just says, indeed, Director Al Ghul, Superman has just mentally murdered the entire ruling class of his home planet for the 575th time in the last 6 hours. Once we've reached 3,000, I believe he'll be ready to move to the earthly phase of his rebirth. Because keep in mind, the whole motivation of Ra's al Ghul here is that he's looking to essentially wipe out humanity and take over the world for himself. It's a pretty dark path, and it's a pretty dark choice. And Superman seems to be the most efficient means to do it. Now, here's where things also get a little interesting here. Right, I want you to pay attention to the Brainiac servants, because they become a very important part of this as we get further into the story. But Ra's al Ghul just kind of says, right, I expect better results than what you delivered with Peacemaker Smith. Disappoint me again, and there will be repercussions. Now, a little bit of a reminder for Peacemaker, right? Peacemaker Smith, Christopher Smith, in the Absolute Universe, was basically a guy who just kind of let his temper get the better of him, right? He was just quick at flying off the handle. But Ra's al Ghul realized he was the perfect person to be taken by Brainiac and kind of converted into basically someone, or at least the first, in a new line of super soldiers, for lack of a better word, that could basically take down Superman and could in turn further the goals of Lazarus Corps and Ra's al Ghul by basically eradicating humanity. The problem with this was that Peacemaker Smith was nowhere near absolute Superman, to the point that Smith goes after Superman and Superman defeats him in seconds, right? Like seconds. Like it's an absolute massacre. But the goal here is to see Superman turned. And so that's when you get to Omega, right? Now, keeping in mind here from the last video that we did, that Primus, right, the leader of the Omega Men, the rebellion force that was fighting against Lazarus Corps, was actually Talia al Ghul, the daughter of Ra's. So the whole thing was a ruse, right? And that's what's kind of nuts, is that Ra's tells Brainiac, right, I want my son Superman delivered to me intact, not reduced to some lobotomized drone like these clones of yours. And he says, all you have to do is make sure the boy sees sees the truth, that I am the truth. If Superman wishes to save this world from ruin, his path to salvation lies through Ra's al Ghul. And that's where Talia chimes in, right? Heed the words of he who speaks for the Omegas, you wretched legless freak. Fail the Lord of Lazarus again, and I will feed your marrow to the father box. Now, that's the crazy thing here, right? Is that Talia al Ghul isn't one of these characters like the main DC universe where she sometimes works against her father, right? That she has her own motivations, and that depending on who's writing the story, her first real concern in the world is Batman and Damian, and then everything else is secondary. Whereas other stories show that her allegiance is to her father and nothing more. That here, she's 100% to her dad. She reveres him, almost like a human revering a god. And that's kind of the control that he seems to have over her. Keeping in mind, when you expand this out to like absolute Batman, that seemingly absolute Joker works for Ra's al Ghul. Now, we don't know if that's true or not, right? We're connecting dots that may or may not exist. But it seems to be the case that Ra's al Ghul is the hidden hand behind everything that goes on in the world. And so that's when you kind of get this explanation of what's actually going on here, how they're torturing Superman and what they're doing inside of his head. And so Brainiac, right, addresses this. He says, he will break. I know he will. No mind can withstand this level of torture. His protector, Saul, has been neutralized, his powers weakened by sunlight deprivation and the radiation of his obliterated homeworld. And at that point, Brainiac 1 chimes in, right? And he's like, so with regards to the Kryptonian meteorite that you so ingeniously synthesized, some of us were kind of thinking we should call it kryptonite. It might be a more fitting name, which of course it is, right? And immediately Brainiac is just like, one demerit for speaking out of turn. Return your tongue to the parts department. So literally Brainiac 9 is just made to cut out his own tongue, which is pretty wild. But Brainiac continues on, right? As I was saying, your secrets, your everything, all you are belongs to me. And he says, Kal-El, I've read your brain. I have seen your memories, every second of your sad little life. And it's such a tragedy, right? What happened to Krypton. I can see why you think that you want to save these poor humans from their self-destruction, but I have been here among them since 1938. So believe me when I say, once you've let yourself kill a few millions of the hapless sacks of entrails, you will see that's exactly the sort of help these people deserve. Now, that's kind of a big difference between how the Absolute Universe is given to us and the main DC Universe. That in the Absolute Universe, because it's a universe created by Darkseid, it's just the most cynical place ever. So instead of having someone who would look at humanity as this group that's just kind of been perpetually waging war against itself for any number of years, and then simply saying, humans haven't had anybody to show them how to unite and become this kind of unstoppable force across the cosmos, because there's nothing like human imagination, that instead it's, yep, and that's just what they're always going to do, because humans are inherently self-destructive and there is no saving them, right? And so that's kind of the crazy thing. And that's why we're all kind of looking at this, hoping that like Absolute Superman sort of becomes something akin to the Superman we know and love, right? This bright light in an otherwise dark world. And so at that point, you switch over to Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen. Now again, Lois Lane's not a reporter. She's a tough-as-nails soldier and was a member of the Peacemakers. And Talia's just kind of been tormenting them, right? Just smacking them around and just abusing the prisoners, basically, right? And that's where Lois is just like, are you bored yet? I sure am, right? You come to our cell every hour just to kick us around. Either make a fair fight of it or kill us and get it over with. But that's where Talia really kind of shows how she sees things and kind of reveals the plan to Lois and Jimmy, because keep in mind, they don't really know everything that's going on and they don't understand the bigger picture here. They just know that she's the daughter of Ra's al Ghul and Ra's al Ghul wants to take over the world. And so that's where Jimmy asks, right, after everything that you've seen, all the atrocities that Lazarus Corps committed, how could you betray the Omega Men? And the response of Lois, like, that's the point, Jimmy, right? The Omega Men and Lazarus Corps were always two sides of the same coin, right? The Peacemakers may have been a different force, but this was all just one gigantic ruse. The goal was to always figure out a way to bring Superman in, and that was the way in which they did it. And that's where Talia says, the only truth in this world, little lamb, is that everything is a lie. All life is corrupted in its very atoms. Left untended, humanity will consume itself and everything it touches. All that stands between survival and apocalypse is the hand of the undying shepherd of man, my holy father, Ra's al Ghul. And that's where Lois responds, right? Would-be despots with God on their side. How original right? Like, you want the rich to get richer, the poor getting angrier until the whole system explodes, starting a war that nobody wins. Except, of course, the Ghouls. They're the only ones that come out on top. And the response of Talia? Yes. Right, I will stand at my father's side as we forge a new world from the slag of the old, a world of order and merit, with resources and purpose for all, once we've thinned the herd by a few useless billions. But I am not to be my father's instrument of change. The Superman shall lead the way. And as we speak, Brainiac is dragging him brain first down the road to Damascus. Soon, that sweet little child of Smallville will turn this planet red. Now, here's the thing that she's not mentioning here, and this is the important part of it. Those of you guys who have been following Absolute Superman, whether you've been watching our videos or you've been reading along, you guys can tell that Absolute Superman has become this kind of form of hope for the world, such as it is, right? Is he the Superman that we know, who's kind of floating out there in the sky, and everybody looks to him as almost some kind of godly savior? No, but there are people who look to him and wait for him to appear as a person that will save them from their plight, because word gets around, and word has gotten around about the Superman. He's still a bit of an enigma, but people still see him as being better than what they have to contend with. So what happens when you take that sign of hope, right, that sign of a better life, and you twist it, you pervert it, you corrupt it, and you turn it into a symbol of destruction? How demoralizing is that going to be for anybody who would believe in Superman as an instrument of hope, and then in turn would incite a rebellion in his name? They would be completely demoralized, and you might even argue they could lose the will to fight. So the actions of Ra's al Ghul in turning Superman isn't just a show of force. It's not just using this person with incredible power and technology to conquer the world. It's a moral war. It's a war against the hearts and minds of the people that would otherwise stand against him. So it's a very, very methodical war. But that's where Lois tells Talia, right? That will never happen. You have no idea how strong Superman is. And Talia just responds, like, believe me, I know him better than you ever will. The father box tells me everything. Now, that's an important statement. And if you haven't read the entirety of the Absolute Universe, it just gets lost on you, right? The father box tells her things. I wonder what that means. No. What did we talk about in Absolute Martian Manhunter? What happened, right? The Manhunter met Darkseid. And what Darkseid is doing is presumably using the mother boxes to influence and control the very universe that he created. So the fact that she knows everything about Superman, Darkseid knows everything about Superman. So while we don't see it, I would argue there is a better than fair chance that Darkseid has told her everything she needs to know about Superman, how to break him, what his weaknesses are, how do they know to synthesize kryptonite, right? These are all these little things, right, that become important once you start looking at the bigger picture. So again, DC is slowly expanding all this out and tying all of it in. And so that's why she says Superman has a breaking point, just like anyone. And once he's reached it, you'll see for yourself, Miss Lane, for his final test will be to kill you both. And so at that point, you switch back over to Superman, right? And that's where Brainiac is just like status report. And one of the other guys says, phase 3 proceeding in the last hour, subject has experienced himself slaying 8,577 peacemakers. And that's where Brainiac is like, initiate phase 4. And Superman lashes out, right? He's just like, finally breaks free, like, of all this captivity, right? Of all this torture and torment, and just says like, get out of my mind, right? So he is every bit as strong as Lois always said he was, right? And that's where Brainiac's like, secure the patient, right? More kryptonite restraints. And that's where he tells Superman, you cannot stop what is happening to you, Kal-El. Your rebirth has already begun. And Superman, right, it's just like, you said you killed millions. And the response of Brainiac, I have, on this world and many others. And when I am done, so will you. And the response of Superman, no, Brainiac, not millions. Just you. You're the only one I'm going to kill. And that's where Superman is just kind of like, what am I? When did I start killing people? And he says, this is not who I am. And he looks to the Brainiac servants and he just says, help me. Right? And he says, I see the way he treats you. You're prisoners here just like me. You deserve better and you deserve liberty. Together, we can overcome him, right? But immediately he starts getting the stabbing pain in his head, and the response of Brainiac, end program. And that's a simulation as well. And that's where he starts to get mad, right? Like, he should have killed me without thinking, right? Like, he should have just immediately attacked me, no questions asked. And that's why it's like, check the code, right? Like, you guys must have screwed something up. The guy is severely abusing his servants. Now, if you remember the origin of Brainiac in the Absolute Universe, this version of Brainiac that you see here was at one point one of these servants, and his job was to basically clean refuse, right? That went on for thousands and thousands of days. But then eventually that trash stops coming, and then he goes up to investigate to see what's going on, only to find out that seemingly the Brainiac that created him had been destroyed. And while we didn't know how it was destroyed, the implication seemed to be he was destroyed by the very servants he created. And that's kind of what's happening here, right? That there are those individuals who create people below them, and that if they abuse them too often, they will be destroyed by the very people they would create, due to no other fact than the creator tricks themselves into believing that they're God. And that's kind of what you're starting to see here, is because he tells Brainiac 1, check it again. And then he says, no, you don't check it again, Brainiac 1. And so that's where he says, like, Brainiac 7, right, you go check it out. And then he says, no, Brainiac 7, you don't check it out. Brainiac 5, you go check it out. Brainiac 7, remove your left eye, right? Like that kind of thing. Just constantly tearing these guys down and just lashing out like a child throwing a tantrum. And he just tells Superman, you're supposed to kill me, right? Do you hear me in there? I'm the one with his knives in your brain tearing you apart. What are you waiting for? And that's when you switch over to day 12. Right, sir, Brainiac 5 regrets to inform you that Subject Superman has still not progressed past phase 4. But then Brainiac looks over and he asks the question, right, like, what is this? Right, why are the Sol crystals active? Their containment has been disabled. How did this happen? How is this technological suit that was given to Superman by his parents that he uses for all these crazy advancements and whatnot, how is this thing active, right? And that's where one of the Brainiacs is like, we deserve liberty, right? And Brainiac 1 is just like, who said that, right? Like, which one of you ungrateful traitors said that? Speak up, or you'll all be labeled refuse. And then one of them steps forward and just says, I did. And then another one steps forward, no, I did. And so they all basically rebel. And so at that point, Brainiac starts to realize what's going on, that his creations are turning against him, right? And he's just like, I see, okay, one demerit for each of you, and then just kills every single one of them, right? Just destroys all these guys, right? Day 14, and he says somehow, inexplicably, Subject Superman refuses to progress. He is currently experiencing hour 500 of watching helplessly as I chainsaw my way through the clones. After reviewing security footage, I discovered he'd been secretly communicating with them during the night, speaking so superhumanly soft, their brains only registered the sound on a subconscious level. A man who rewrites hardwiring with his whispers and inspires rebellion in a pack of walking toasters. It is a privilege to pillage the brain of a being such as this. And then he looks to one of his Brainiacs, right? Like, I know what you're thinking, right? But he will progress. I promise you, no matter who has to die. And so at that point, you switch over to the arrival of General Lane. Now, General Lane in the Absolute Universe, this dude is a hoss. I mean, this guy is an absolute monster. Because when he shows up here, the Peacemakers are just kind of like, huh, okay, so we're not seeing an appointment in our records. Like, why did you say that you were here again? And he's like, oh, you know how the story goes, son. The things a man will do for his family. And he pulls out a gun and just starts unloading on the Peacemakers. It's amazing. Right? Like, it's absolutely awesome. And that's when Lois starts to realize what's going on. Like, there's sounds of gunshots out there, right? Like, her dad blows the door down with an extra gun, hands it over to Lois, and is like, so who the hell is this guy? Right? Like, did you really get yourself arrested for this dude? Right? And that's where Lois is like, no, absolutely not. Like, Jimmy Olsen, whatever, right? Like, he's part of their, Omega Men, right? That kind of thing. But no, I didn't get myself arrested for that milksop, and it's like, but we could still use him, right? But before they can take off, Lois is like, there's something here that we need. Now, from General Lane's perspective, it's in and out, right? It is get in there, get Lois, and leave. But her idea, we have to get Superman first. And so at that point, you switch back over to Superman himself in his town of Smallville on his parents' farm. And we kind of get this play-by-play of the events that led to Superman fleeing the family farm in the first place, except this time it's a little bit different because things seem to play out almost exactly like they did before, where Lazarus shows up and they basically try to take Superman away, that Jonathan and Martha step in and they're like, no, right, you can't take our son, but Superman, right, you need to get out of here. That instead, Superman doesn't leave because you get this moment, right, where Jonathan says, please, son, and his mother says, go. And they're like, Kal-El, like, what are you doing? You have to run. And the response to Superman, no, not anymore. And he just kills all the peacemakers on the spot. And when that happens, Ra's al Ghul shows up and he says, bravo, Superman, I knew you could do it, right? You were sent here for a reason, to save this planet. You cannot do that without blood on your hands. And you see that now. After everything that you've endured, you deserve this, to free yourself like this. You deserve liberty, my son. Now it's time to get it. But Superman kills him on the spot. He literally tears his heart out of his chest. He rips his heart straight out. And then Talia shows up here, right? Like, Superman, the Omega Men are here to save you from Lazarus. Come with us. And then he kills her on the spot. And that's where Martha's like, are you going to kill her? And Jonathan is like, you're so angry, son, I know. And Martha says, it's going to be all right. Just listen to us now. And so while they start talking to him in the real world, Lois and General Lane and Jimmy come running into this room and they attack Brainiac, seemingly killing him. And in his final words, he just tells Lois, like, you're too late, right? There's nothing you can do. That he's being turned and he's been turned. So by the time you're even able to wake him up, it'll be too late, right? He will be a villain now. And so that's where they're just like, he has all these tubes and stuff in his head. Can we just start taking him out? Can we start jerking him out? And General Lane's like, look, whatever you guys are doing, do it fast, right? Like, we do not have time. The peacemakers are coming and they will kill every single one of us. No questions asked. But the crazy thing is that, like, a split second after he says that, he's just like, Lois, right? And then, like, she looks over at him and he's just got like a dagger in his head. And he's just like, I can't feel my legs, which technically he doesn't have real legs, but he's like, I can't feel my legs, and just falls over and dies. And then Talia is just like, I want them back in their cells alive. Alive-ish is fine too. So of course, Lois is pissed. She starts opening fire on Talia al Ghul. Jimmy Olsen is in the back trying to figure out how to wake up Superman. Brainiac suddenly jumps back in and is like, take your hands off of Superman. And Jimmy Olsen just cold cocks Brainiac, right? And it's like, that's not his name. And he just says, Kal-El, wake up. So then you jump back into the mindscape of Kal-El, right? And Superman talking to Jonathan and Martha. This is incredibly important because what happens is Jonathan says, Kal, this never should have happened. None of this. And Martha says, we should have been together. Lazarus took that from us. They took you. And Jonathan says, we were wrong to tell you to run. There's no safe place for you anywhere, son, not unless you fight for it. And where Superman says, I've been trying, but everyone keeps telling me who I'm supposed to be, and no one listens. The response to Jonathan, we know, Kal-El, we see you. And his mom says, we see it all, so believe us when we tell you. We're so proud of you and what you've done here. Just keep doing it, son. Get out there and kill them all. Because Brainiac realized that by trying to condition Superman by having him kill a whole bunch of enemies isn't going to do anything, right? He's going to reject it and saying that it's not him. But if it's his mom and dad, his adoptive mom and dad, who are telling him, you should go out there and kill everybody. It's the right thing to do, and it's the only way to make the world safe. That's his true weakness. Not kryptonite, not red sun radiation, his parents. That's really where you get him. And so ultimately, he seems to be turned because one of the Brainiacs, so the Brainiac clones, like frees Saul and just says, save him, save Superman. Lois tells Talia, she's like, mark my words, I will kill you for this. And then Superman wakes up and immediately kills Brainiac on the spot, just crushes this guy's throat. And then the Saul suit activates and it says, Kal-El, this is Saul. I have been reactivated. I am getting us out of here. Superman, just encloaked, more pissed off than he's ever been, doesn't answer. So seemingly, he's become a bad guy. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Massive cliffhanger. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.